what I don't want to say is that there's nothing to be done, that there is no moral or political imperative, and that we can just continue with this mindless potlatch civilization until everything is ruined, because I don't believe that, and I think it's socially irresponsible to say that. On the other hand, what I don't want to fall too much in the other direction toward is saying that it all depends on us and that we must raise enormous levels of anxiety in ourselves and act as though the salvation of the planet depended on us. What more is happening is that the most important political work that needs to be done is for each of us to raise our own consciousness about these issues, and then to create a community based on the sum total of our personal acts of reformation. So, it is very important to bring help to people in the third world who are struggling to raise families and preserve their environments and this sort of thing. But if I were a rationalist, I would be completely despairing. So we are more in the role of like midwives of this new order. And I guess it's useful then to return to that birth metaphor. The birth of the new humanity and the new earth is going to happen. But in the same way that a midwife or an obstetrician can ease a birth, make it smoother, make it less painful for all concerned, that's the role that political activism needs to take. So I think we should act as though the salvation of the earth is on our shoulders, but feel as though it is an automatic unfolding that we need not have anxiety about. The Chinese philosopher Wi Po Yang said, worry is preposterous. And I think that's true. We don't know enough to worry. And to worry is, in a sense, a kind of act of hubris, because you are claiming complete knowledge of the situation and then you worry. And so what is much more empowering and what makes the process of historical ending easier, I think, is to act from your heart, and to individual acts of caring are more important than giving your energy to grandiose political schemes. I mean, it almost comes back down to the gospel admonition to, heal the sick, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, bury the dead. But there's nothing there about grandiose political reform and all that sort of thing. That, I think, arises out of the zeitgeist of the collectivity. And I'm very hopeful. People have a sort of hear my rap differently. I mean, I've had people, after what I thought were inspiring panegyrics, come up to me and say, but it's such a dark and horrifying vision. It means that I failed as a communicator in that situation, because I'm the gonest and most irrational hope freak I've ever met. I mean, I think everything is fine. Everything is going toward the purpose for which it was intended, but it's an act of conscious awareness on the part of each of us that carries us toward that. So, often in what I say, there is, if not the fact of contradiction, then the appearance of contradiction. This is because, to my mind, life is complicated enough to admit of contradiction. Was it Oscar Wilde, or who was it, who said, I contradict myself? I contradict myself. Logical consistency is one of the prejudices that we've inherited from the scientific attempt to describe the world. But in fact, even science at its basic level has now abandoned that as an ideal. In quantum physics, the way it's done mathematically is you have an ordinary causal logic, an if-then logic, but in order to handle what quantum physics is attempting to describe, you also have to have what are called islands of Boole, or islands of Boolean logic, which is embedded in the standard logic and which is a logic of both and. And you cannot reduce this to a non-contradictory description. The great thing about the rational program of science is pushed far enough, it reveals the irrational foundations of nature. And that's really what the crisis in science now is. The cutting edges of physical science have contacted the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in the 20s, the anthropocentric principle in the 80s and 70s, and we are realizing that somehow the notion of an observer outside the system with a godlike objectivity and zero input into the situation, that was a necessary fiction for the more naive program of description of nature. But as we move into the more sophisticated description of nature, we have to place the observer in the picture, and then there is going to be a reverberation of contradiction that is probably can't be gotten rid of. I mentioned I referred to this in the talk last night, where I said we shouldn't push for closure. We should accept that it is in principle mysterious, and so we are never explaining life or relationships or economies or whatever we're looking at. We're describing them with ever more prescient accuracy, but we cannot eliminate the unknown. One of my teachers years ago, West Churchman, wrote a wonderful book called Planning on Uncertainty. And I think, we all need to plan on uncertainty, and it's the one thing that is left out of most models, because the model builder has such faith in the model that he would never build in a trapdoor into the realm of uncertainty. And yet life is composed almost entirely of these kinds of trapdoors, you see. Does that do it?
So, do I understand then that in your vision, we really don't know anything about what it's going to look like once we're out of the birth canal, but what we can do now is behave with integrity toward the world that we're in today. Is that right?
That's right. And it's not that in principle we can't know what it's like out beyond the birth canal. It's simply that it's too early. I used the metaphor last night of that the transcendental object is below the event horizon. It is. And so all we can see is the rosy glow of its promise at this point. But give us 10 years, and the actual edge of the transcendental object will rise above the event horizon. I mean, I don't think that we are marginalized or part of fad and fashion. I think this is actually the rising modality necessary for the future if we're going to make it through. In other words, I suspect that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, the things we are talking about today will be the general metaphors and concerns in society, because I just have a very strong intuition based on, a a lot of journeying into those hyperspatial modalities, that this is the path. And I'm sufficiently convinced of that to submit it to a kind of intellectual plebiscite. I mean, I believe that ideas compete with each other the way animals compete in an environment, and that the best ideas, the most fitting ideas for the human adventure will eliminate their competition. And that's what we're experiencing now in the political domain, is a competition between ideological systems roughly comparable to dinosaurs and mammals. And, you can decide which is which, but the two are incommensurate, and one is in the act of eliminating the other. And so it's a matter of observing this process, understanding it, and being comfortable with it. If you're right, I don't think you need to feel any urgency, because that will quite naturally percolate out in the mix. Many of you have heard me quote William Blake. It's always worth repeating. He said, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. In other words, understanding compels belief. You don't have to hammer on somebody. Your task is to refine your message into an understandable form, and then let the dynamics of intellectual competition decide what is the best model to follow. Yeah.
I had a question related to what you were just saying, and then I had a chemistry question. What keeps me optimistic is that information seems to be spreading more rapidly. And some futurists have said that by the year 2011, that information will be doubling every second. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, yeah. I mean, part of what I was going to talk about last night and didn't get to is I'm the purveyor of a very formal mathematical theory about how history unfolds itself and what time is. And to your great good fortune, you're not going to be exposed to this today. Had we 2 days, I would fillet you with it on the second day. But here's the thing that's going on. Since the very first moments of the universe's existence, novelty, as I call it, or complexity, as someone else has called it, or connectedness, has been increasing. So that the early universe was very simple. It was a plasma of free electrons. There were no laws of molecular physics, still less laws of biology or gene segregation or something like that. As the universe has aged, it has become more and more complex. We represent the culmination to the present moment of that process. Well, I don't think that's particularly big news. It's sort of a stating of the obvious that the universe has grown more complex through time. But what is interesting is that each advancement into complexity that has built on the previously established foundation of complexity occurs more rapidly than the stages which preceded it. So if you were to draw a diagram of that, it would be an involuting spiral. So that after the Big Bang and things settled down after the first few nanoseconds of the universe's existence, well then for a long time it was very boring. And all that happened was that temperatures fell very gradually. Eventually they fell to the point where atoms could settle down into stable orbits around nuclei. And then as the temperature fell still further, eventually these atoms could aggregate into molecular structures. Again, each advancement into novelty proceeding more rapidly than the stage which preceded it. Well, that's why, to my mind, human history is not a radical break with primate biology. It simply represents an acceleration of primate behavior into a more compacted temporal domain. And high technology, electronic data transfer, the erection of global society, which has built on the previous levels of cultural attainment, has happened even more quickly. So that these eras, or epochs, you could almost think of them as, of complexity, are now of such short duration that instead of taking millions of years, or perhaps billions of years, to transit through one of these, we now are moving through them at the rate of one or two a decade. And beyond that, one or two every 2 or 3 years. And beyond that, one or two every few months. And I see no elegant reason for assuming that this process will ever cease its asymptotic acceleration. Well, then if you picture what I'm describing, it's a funnel of some sort, which begins with an extremely wide mouth, but which has now narrowed to an extremely small and fast-moving kind of situation. And this is why history is a self-limiting process. It isn't that we have broken away from the slow-moving processes of ordinary nature. It's that we represent nature at a different time frame. And I think this is why history is ending, because it's going so much faster than it used to go that it's going to finish very soon. There may be as much experience ahead of us as there is behind us, but we're moving through it so much faster than we used to that we are literally approaching the end of time at a faster and faster speed. And this is something built into the structure of the cosmos. It's the answer to the question, where did we come from? We were called forth out of biological organization by the continued acceleration of the expression of novelty. And this is why I count myself as a proponent of what I call the big surprise rather than the Big Bang. The big surprise lies ahead of us, not billions of years or millions of years or thousands of years in the future, but within our lifetimes, potentially. And it's interesting, I think I said this last night, the people who run the world now possess curves which, when they draw these curves and try to extrapolate them 50 years into the future, it makes no sense at all. You cannot extrapolate the ozone hole, the AIDS epidemic, the spread of plutonium. You cannot extrapolate these things 100 years into the future because they all go asymptotic and reach infinity. So it means the oceans boil, the atmosphere blows off, everybody dies, and that's the end of it. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think novelty is the saving grace, and that the historical adventure is essentially coming into the finale of the third act, and it is our great good fortune to be spectators and participants in the phenomena that for all preceding generations could only be anticipated and prayed for. It's a screwy position, I understand. I mean, boiled down to a bumper sticker, it's a bearded guy on the corner with a sign which says, "Repent, for the end is nigh," or maybe just, "The end is nigh." But I think all the evidence is that the soul is about to collectively leave the body. The human imagination, married to technology, has become a force too powerful to be unleashed within the fragile ecosystem of this planet. So we must either carry ourselves elsewhere, or the planet's homeostatic drive to preserve ordinary biology will eliminate us through epidemic disease or climatological upheaval, or, there are many possibilities. So I think we are being propelled somewhat reluctantly into a new human modality that is as radical a shift as birth is to the individual, or as the original entry into history was for our species. History cannot be conceived of as preceding another 1,000 or 10,000 years. I mean, it just can't be. So it must be that it's a self-limiting process. And it only lasts 25,000 years. I mean, if you go back 25,000 years, the Earth was in ecodynamic balance. Human beings were fully established, as intelligent, as caring, as creative as you and I. Theater, poetry, dance, love, hope, tragedy, religion, all these things were in place. But history represents Gaia hitting the fast-forward button on the evolution of the primates, and it seems of long duration to us because we, at the level of the expression of the individual phenotype, are as ephemeral as mayflies. A person lives 70 years, 90 years, and then they're gone. But on a scale of 25,000 years, clearly what is happening on this planet is the emergence of an entirely new kind of order within the natural order. It is natural, but it is new. There is no contradiction in this. Once atoms were a new invention. Once molecules were a new invention. Once polymers were the cutting edge of what's happening. Now the cutting edge of what's happening is large-scale primate machine integrated societies based on the movement of information. Did that do it? Yeah. Oh, you want to follow on?
Just a quick chemistry question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Is 5-methyloxy-NN-dimethyltryptamine crystalline legal to possess? And if one was going to mix it, would one mix it with harmine, harmelo, heroline, or harmaline?
That was a word salad. Well, I think you're asking about 5-MeO-DMT, 5-methoxy-dimethyltryptamine, the toad foam of recent fame. As far as I understand, I think that it's legal. However, it would probably depend on the length of the fangs of the local DA, because there is what's called the Kogener law, which says that structural near relatives of hallucinogens can also be prosecuted as illegal compounds. As far as the question about the harmine alkaloids, harmine, harmaline, tetrahydroharman, harmelo, I think is apocryphal, specious. But the notion which must lie behind your question is harmine alkaloids inhibit monoamine oxidase, which is an enzyme system in the human gut that tends to inactivate amines, monoamines, of which these hallucinogens almost all fall into that category. You could attempt to inhibit your MAO with a dose of harmine or harmaline, and then smoke 5-MeO DMT. But I don't recommend this unless you are a pharmacologist with hours and hours of psychedelic flight time on your log. And this is certainly nothing for the ingenue to attempt. Once you get out into the realm of synergies, that means what happens when you run two metabolically active compounds at the same time, and some people do 3 and 4 and 5, you're definitely on your own, because pharmacology doesn't study drugs like that. They study them in isolation, their activity. And, some people say of the smokable tryptamines, they're so quick that wouldn't it be logical to inhibit your MAO in order to freeze frame the experience, and instead of having it last 3 minutes, have it last 30 minutes. Yes, that's a fine idea, but what if it lasted 30 hours instead? I mean, you don't, a miss is as good as a mile in this game, so you should have your mantras ready if you push off into that. Yeah.
While we're on the subject of chemistry, I have a quick and easy question. Okay, I imagine psilocybin is probably, pretty common use, and I'm sure that the people around here are pretty aware of the malathion spraying that's going on. And I've always been curious. I'm not a chemistry student, but since psilocybin does have a phosphorus in it, and I know most of malathion and most of the other chemicals like it are organophosphates, and they react synergistically. Is there a possibility of a synergistic toxicity when you get, a dose of malathion and you're using psilocybin?
Well, every once in a while these kinds of questions come along, and the answer is always, since research with psilocybin is illegal and even in rats counterproductive to your career, nobody knows. You mentioned the phosphorus group in psilocybin. Psilocybin is 4-phosphoryloxy-N-dimethyltryptamine. This is very interesting to me because, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, but it's the only 4-substituted indole in nature on this planet. The only 4-substituted indole in nature on this planet. Well, this is suggestive to me of a possible extraterrestrial origin for this molecule, because the way evolution works is from one structure you elaborate another structure, and then near cousins of that appear, and so forth and so on. The phosphorus group in the 4 position on psilocybin sticks out like a sore thumb when you look at the structure of organic nature too much, that malathion is a phosphorylated compound. I noticed in Hoffer and Osmond's hallucinogens, malathion is occasionally, there are known cases of human abuse of malathion. And is there a bigger debt to pay at the dose where it does that? In other words, I don't know. Well, that's very interesting. Because it's a neurotoxin, it also creates a neural disturbance. I'm willing to buy into the notion that all drugs are poisons at certain doses. All substances are poisons at certain doses. I mean, you can kill yourself with common salt if you eat 3 pounds of it. That's all she wrote for you. So always what you're doing is you're perturbing the dynamic of ordinary functioning, and then what you're watching is the chemical cascade that returns you to equilibrium.